All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome all, and welcome to our very first Ambassadorial lecture in 2022, presented by the ASEAN Study Center, Universitas Gadjah Mada. My name is Ayu Kartikasari from the Research Division at ASEAN Study Center, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and I'll be here as the Master of Ceremony for today's lecture. And on behalf of the ASEAN Study Center, thank you very much for joining this session. Today, His Excellency Ambassador Noel Servigon from the Philippine Mission to ASEAN in Jakarta will deliver an interesting lecture with the title Improving the Implementation of ASEAN Charter. But before we begin the lecture, I'd like to inform all participants of today's lecture that if you have questions or opinions you would like to convey to His Excellency Ambassador Noel Servigon, please kindly drop your questions or opinions through the live chat box below, and we will raise the questions in the Q&A session later on. Also, we will provide e-certificate for participants who joins today's lecture. And to claim this certificate, you will have to fill out the evaluation form through a link that will be shared after the discussion. All right, to start today's lecture, I'd like to welcome Ms. Yolida Nuraini Santoso, who will lead us to the introduction to our speaker, as well as to bridge the whole discussion for today's lecture. Ms. Yolida is the Managing Director of ASEAN Study Center, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Having completed her undergraduate degree from Universitas Gadjah Mada studying international relations, and she went on to read international public policy at the University College of London. Ms. Yolida previously worked as ASEAN Secretariat facilitating political cooperation and is a chevening scholar with areas of interest in transnationalism, oil and gas, and ASEAN in its political security context. So without further ado, Ms. Yolida, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Madam MC. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon from us here in Yogyakarta. I hope my voice is audible. Welcome to our very first ambassadorial lecture of 2022. To inform our viewers who are perhaps new to our series of discussions, the ambassadorial lecture is held to discuss strategic issues surrounding ASEAN from the point of view of an ambassador. So today I have the extreme honor of welcoming our esteemed guest speaker, the Permanent Representative of the Philippines to ASEAN, His Excellency Ambassador Noel Servigon. Good afternoon, Ambassador. It's an honor to have you here with us today. Ambassador Noel will guide us through the topic of the improvement of the implementation of the ASEAN Charter, which we have been anticipating with great excitement here at the center. So we hope to also welcome your participation and enthusiasm in the question and answer session later on. So before we start the discussion, please allow me to introduce you to the works of Ambassador Noel. Ambassador Noel Eugene Eusebio M. Servigon is a career Foreign Service officer of the Republic of the Philippines. He joined the Department of Foreign Affairs in 1988. His diplomatic postings include Vienna, Austria, Ankara, Turkey, The Hague of the Netherlands, Abu Dhabi of the Emirates, Manado, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and Hanoi, Vietnam. 8th of May in 2019, he assumed his position as Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Philippines to ASEAN. At the Department of Foreign Affairs in Manila, he served in the Office of Personnel and Administrative Services of the Office of ASEAN Affairs as Director for the then ASEAN Standing Committee, the Office of the United Nations and other international organizations, the Office of the Undersecretary for Administration, and as an Assistant Secretary of Foreign Affairs and the head of the Human Resources Management Office. Ambassador Servigon has degrees Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Laws, and Master of Public Management from the University of the Philippines. His first job was teaching. He taught history, political science, and consular diplomatic affairs in several colleges in Iloilo City and Manila. Ambassador Servigon was born in 1962 in Iloilo City. He is married to Marichu Torato Servigon, formerly a training specialist at the Foreign Service Institute. They have two adult sons, Eugene Sumakwel and Patrick Suleiman. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Noel Servigon. Ambassador, I present you the screen.
Thank you very much, Madam Yolida Santoso, Managing Director of the ASEAN Studies Center, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Fellow academicians, members of the academic community of the Gadjah Mada University, citizens and friends of ASEAN, good morning. Oh, it's now good afternoon here. I'm honored to be invited today to speak at the ASEAN Studies Center of the Gadjah Mada University. I have long heard about this academic institution and I have wanted to visit it personally, but the ongoing COVID pandemic has prevented me. However, there is always hope, and before I end my term here in Jakarta, I hope to visit Yogyakarta and meet the people of this ASEAN Studies Center. Friends and citizens of ASEAN, I have chosen to speak about the ASEAN Charter because it is my favorite topic. I started working on ASEAN matters in 1997 when our relations were based on a series of documents starting with the 1967 Bangkok Declaration. I was delighted when, after several decades, our leaders decided that it was high time to adopt a charter that would govern our regional association. It has been more than a decade since the charter has entered into force. Through the years, the charter has guided ASEAN in its various activities. There were several attempts to review the provisions. In 2017, during the chairmanship of the Philippines, we started the process of amending certain portions of the charter. In 2020, during the chairmanship of Vietnam, there was also the review of the charter's implementation. I am sure that all of you will agree with me that the ASEAN Charter is a living document that must continuously be improved, both in its contents as well as in its implementation. Citizens and friends of ASEAN, my talk this morning cannot cover the whole scope of the ASEAN Charter. It will take a regular course in your university to discuss all its provisions. Rather, I will dwell only on the functions of the organs and bodies of ASEAN. I will point out certain provisions of the ASEAN which, based on my experience, should be implemented further. In the limited time that we have, I shall attempt to discuss as many of these provisions as possible. And I hope that I can get valuable comments and observations which would be useful in my work here in Jakarta. Slide 2, please. Here is a listing of the major organs and bodies of ASEAN. Let us begin with the ASEAN Summit. As provided for in the Charter, the ASEAN Summit consists of the heads of state and government of the ASEAN member states. It is up to each member state to designate the appropriate leader that would attend the ASEAN Summit. Slide 3, please. I believe that these are the most important functions of the ASEAN Summit. First, the summit is the supreme policy-making body of ASEAN. It is in the apex. It makes the final decision on all ASEAN matters. The second function is the most challenging: to address emergency situations affecting ASEAN by taking appropriate steps. You could remember that in 2020, at the onset of the COVID pandemic, a special online meeting of the ASEAN Summit was convened in order to exchange views and to recommend measures to address the emerging crisis. Slide 4, please. Article 7 of the ASEAN Charter contains the major functions of the summit. For the last point, as you may notice, issues get to the summit only through these bodies, which we will discuss later. The ASEAN Coordinating Council, the ASEAN Community Councils, and the ASEAN Sectoral Ministerial bodies. Slide 5, please. This item in Article 7 makes reference to a very important provision located in another part of the Charter, the decision-making process of ASEAN. Slide 6, please. As all of you know, consensus has been the most important doctrine of ASEAN since the very beginning. The principle is enshrined in the ASEAN Charter, particularly in paragraph 1 of Article 20. Paragraph 2 of Article 20 is a very crucial guide in the decision-making process of ASEAN. It mandates the ASEAN Summit to decide on a process, and I quote, where consensus cannot be achieved. Logically, my dear friends and citizens of ASEAN, I believe that consensus doctrine should not be invoked in order to break the impasse. We hope that the ASEAN Summit should make a decision on this matter soon, pursuant to this article which I cited, which is Article 20, paragraph 2. Next slide, please, 7. My dear friends, having a rule to avoid a deadlock is important because the following functions of ASEAN Summit have to be properly implemented. They are to decide on cases of serious breach of the Charter or non-compliance. And secondly, to decide on disputes that remains unresolved after the application of the dispute settlement mechanism. Next slide. Here are two important provisions which await proper implementation. The first is on issues that cut across community councils. The Charter is very clear that ad hoc interministerial meetings have to be held. The rules for these ad hoc meetings have still to be adopted. The second is on the ASEAN sectoral ministerial bodies and other institutions. You can see in Annex 1 of the Charter the listing of these bodies. ASEAN has yet to adopt rules on the establishment of these bodies, particularly the various ASEAN centers and institutions that are sponsored by the member states. By the way, I hope you have your copies of the ASEAN Charter with you while listening to me. It would be very useful as a reference to have your own copy of the ASEAN Charter while you are studying under the ASEAN Center of the university. This booklet would be very useful to you. Okay? Can you see the? Can you see clearly the screen? I would suggest that the text be larger and that my face be smaller so that you can read the provisions instead of my face showing. Yeah, that's better. Okay. So where are we now? We are in this slide number 8. The functions of the ASEAN Summit. As I was mentioning earlier, the second function that I would like to highlight is the establishment and dissolution of sectoral ministerial bodies and other ASEAN institutions. You can see in Annex 1 of the Charter that there is a long list of the sectoral ministerial bodies. I think 3 or 4 pages. 5 pages listing the different bodies, centers, and institutions. ASEAN has yet to adopt uniform rules on the establishment of these bodies, particularly the various centers and institutions that are sponsored by the member states. Next slide, number 9, please. Now, let us move to the ASEAN Coordinating Council, the ACC, ACC. This is a new organ created by the Charter. In the pre-Charter setup, based on the 1967 Bangkok Declaration, it was the meeting of the ASEAN foreign ministers, called the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting, which acted as the coordinating body of ASEAN. The framers of the ASEAN Charter decided to create a new organ, but with exactly still the same membership, which are the foreign ministers. So we have 2 bodies with the same membership, but with different names. The ASEAN Coordinating Council and the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting, or the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Meeting. Here are the functions of the ACC, which I consider that should be implemented. The first is on the adoption of the rules of procedure of interministerial meetings to address important issues that cut across the community councils. I mentioned this before when I was talking about the ASEAN Summit. Presently, there is a joint consultative meeting which tries to address these cross-cutting issues. But the JCM, as it is called, is not provided for in the Charter. The second function is on the admission of new members. So far, it is only Timor-Leste which has a pending application for admission. However, we should not discount the possibility that in the future, there might be new applicants for membership in our association. The third function that I would like to emphasize is my favorite, it is the most important function of the ACC. That is the adoption of the terms of reference and rules of procedure of ASEAN. I believe that Article 49 of the Charter can cover all the gaps and ambiguities in the Charter and is applicable to present and future unforeseen situations. The ACC is empowered to adopt these appropriate terms of reference and rules of procedure on all matters pertaining to ASEAN. Next slide, please. We are now halfway in our discussion. Aside from the Asean Coordinating Council, the ASEAN Charter created 3 new organs. These are the ASEAN Political Security Community Council, the ASEAN Economic Community Council, and the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community Council. The main function of these 3 new councils is to coordinate the work of the different sectors under its purview. Annex 1 again of the Charter categorizes the different sectors according to the community council to where each belong to. You can check it in Annex 1. For every community council, we have the listing of the different ASEAN sectoral ministerial bodies, institutions, centers, and other entities. Aside from that function, and the community councils is also important in its work when considering the management of cross-cutting issues in ASEAN. As you can see in the last portion, they must coordinate issues which cut across the other community councils. Okay. Next slide. Number 11. The ASEAN Sectoral Ministerial Bodies. Article 10 of the ASEAN Charter mentions only the functions of the ASEAN Sectoral Ministerial Bodies. However, it does not provide for a uniform criteria for their establishment. Annex 1 of the Charter lists these bodies, but it includes centers and institutions which are obviously not ministerial in nature. Under Article 49 of the Charter, I believe that the ASEAN Coordinating Council can adopt such criteria to guide not only the establishment of ministerial bodies, but also the creation of centers and institutions. Next slide, number 12. Among these ASEAN sectoral ministerial bodies, the most important is the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Meeting. It was established, as I have said earlier, through the 1967 Bangkok Declaration and was called the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting, or AMM. Many of its functions were taken over by the ASEAN Coordinating Council, again, which has exactly the same membership. The present ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting does not have a specific article in the ASEAN Charter. However, it is mentioned in several articles related to the external relations of ASEAN. As you can see in this slide, this refers to the role of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting in several aspects of ASEAN's external relations, including those related to the third country committees and to the dialogue partners and other partners, as well as the accreditation of ambassadors to ASEAN from non-ASEAN member states. Next slide, please. 13. The ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting also have these functions, which I find strange because I thought that they should be under the ACC, the ACC. It is the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting which is responsible for recommending the appointment of the Secretary General. That was also the job of the Foreign Ministers meeting before the Charter, to recommend the appointment of the Secretary General. And then it's also the Foreign Ministers meeting that is responsible in adopting the terms of reference of the ASEAN Human Rights Body. Next slide, please, number 14. Friends and citizens of ASEAN, you may have heard of meetings of senior officials here in ASEAN. Annex 1 of the Charter also names the various bodies of senior officials under each of the ASEAN sectoral ministerial bodies. Most of these senior officials, or SOM, predated the ASEAN Charter. But what do they do? There is no specific article in the ASEAN Charter discussing their functions, but they are mentioned in several articles across the Charter. The main function, as you can see, is to support certain ASEAN bodies. Senior officials support the Asean Coordinating Council, then the ASEAN Community Councils, and also the ASEAN Sectoral Ministerial Bodies. Next slide, number 15. The ASEAN Charter created a new organ called the Committee of Permanent Representatives, or CPR. Each ASEAN member state appoints a permanent representative to ASEAN. And I am the permanent representative, or PR, as they call us, of the Philippines to ASEAN. Collectively, all the PRs constitute the CPR, which is my home organ here in ASEAN. Article 12 of the Charter mentions the CPR's primary functions. Some of these functions need to be elaborated, such as support the work of the ASEAN Community Council and the ASEAN Sectoral Ministerial Bodies, and coordinate with the ASEAN National Secretariats and other ASEAN Sectoral Ministerial Bodies. Several years ago, the terms of reference of the CPR was expanded in order to address the relationship of the body with these higher organs. However, there was no mention about the relationship between the CPR and the senior officials meeting. Also not mentioned in the Charter is the role of the permanent representative as head of their respective permanent missions in Jakarta. Next slide, please. Additional functions are mentioned also in other parts of the ASEAN Charter. It should be noted that the CPR has taken over the functions of the ASEAN Standing Committee, which was established by the 1967 Bangkok Declaration. Next slide, number 17. The ASEAN National Secretariats were mentioned in the 1967 Bangkok Declaration. But the ASEAN Charter now further specifies their function in Article 13. The heads of the National Secretariats used to be known as the Directors General, who then comprised the then ASEAN Standing Committee. Next slide, please, number 18. Friends and citizens of ASEAN. The 1967 Bangkok Declaration did not provide for a Secretariat of ASEAN, nor for a Secretary General. It was only in 1976 that ASEAN adopted an agreement establishing the ASEAN Secretariat here in Jakarta and headed by a Secretary General. His functions are provided for in Article 11 of the Charter, but other equally important functions are stated in other articles. It should be noted that aside from being the Chief Administrative Officer of ASEAN and being responsible for implementing the decisions of ASEAN, the Secretary General is also involved in the settlement of disputes by providing good offices, conciliation, or mediation to member states. Next slide, please. 19. Now we go to a very important figure in ASEAN, the chairman of ASEAN. Article 31 of the Charter provides for a single chairmanship of ASEAN. Before the adoption of the ASEAN Charter, it was the chairmanship of the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting of Foreign Ministers, which was rotated annually. Now, the Charter provides that every year, the same ASEAN member the same or single ASEAN member state shall chair the ASEAN Summit and related summits, the Asean Coordinating Council, the ASEAN Community Councils, 3 of them, and the Committee of Permanent Representatives. However, as you can see in the slide, the Charter states that as to ASEAN sectoral ministerial bodies and their respective senior officials, the ASEAN chair shall chair these bodies only, and I quote, where appropriate, unquote. This was provided for because some of these bodies have their own rotation plan for chairmanship, and some of them do not meet annually. However, it should be noted that the ASEAN chair always chairs the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting and the ASEAN Economic Ministers meeting. Next slide. Number 20. Aside from chairing ASEAN organs and bodies, the chairman of ASEAN is mandated by the ASEAN Charter to undertake other roles. As you can see here in the slide, the last role there is very important in Article 23, Paragraph 2. Just like the Secretary General of ASEAN, the chairman of ASEAN is mandated to provide good offices, conciliation or mediation to member states which are parties to a dispute. Next slide, please. Questions and comments. Now, before I answer your questions, I would like to thank the organizers of this event for holding this opportunity for me to talk to you this afternoon. I hope that through webinars like this, ASEAN is brought closer to the people of ASEAN. It is only through a deeper understanding of ASEAN and its charter that we can fulfill the goal of having a rules-based regional community. So friends, citizens of ASEAN, I am ready to interact with you, to exchange views with you through your comments.
Thank you,
Before I
Ambassador.
end, thank you again to all those who have helped me, especially my colleague here, Third Secretary J.P. Samonte.
Thank you, Ambassador, for raising some very thought-provoking points. I'd like to echo your point on how consensus is a core principle for ASEAN and is also laid out in the ASEAN Charter as it helps to navigate the decision-making process of ASEAN member states through the many issues or cases or disputes that surround the region. And at the same time, it helps to contain the members within a united front. Now, this principle is perhaps also very close to us and is perhaps also seen as an identity, which sets it apart from other regional groupings. But at the same time, we must acknowledge that it has put ASEAN under the scrutiny of the academic community. So if I may start the discussion session, I'd like to get your take on the sentiment of that it's time to revise or revisit articles of the Charter, especially in light of several ongoing developments, such as the political unrest in Myanmar some time ago, or negotiations of the South China Sea. Induce is at all necessary.
Okay, thank you very much. So your question, Madam, is about the amendment of the Charter. You know
Correct.
that The amendment was attempted several years ago during, I think 5 years ago exactly, during our chairmanship. But I believe that this will again entail a long process. If you look at the provisions of the amendment of the charter, in the charter provisions amendment, it requires again a consensus, and the charter is very clear about that. There must be a consensus when recommending amendments, and it has to be ratified by all member states. So it will require a process. However, as I pointed out, the doctrine of consensus could be addressed if they could not reach the consensus, because the charter itself allows the ASEAN Summit to make a decision, to decide on a process whenever there is whenever a consensus cannot be achieved. It is in the charter. The framers have anticipated it, that in case no consensus will be achieved, the ASEAN Summit can decide on that. And I'm sure that that decision will just not have to, they then logically should not apply the issue, the process which is under question, which is the consensus. They can decide following certain parliamentary procedures on how an issue can be dissolved if there is no consensus. So, as you have mentioned, there are prevailing issues, and the ASEAN Summit, as the supreme policy-making body of ASEAN, can always decide on that. That is my own personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. With that being said, I'd like to now invite our audience who are joining us from home to participate in this discussion. Kindly use the chat box to drop in your questions, and we'll for you. I believe we have a few teams in line already. To get the ball rolling, allow me to read out the first few, which our technician will very kindly help to highlight for us. We have a question from Suki. Good afternoon, Ambassador. How do you see the ASEAN Charter to promote peace and freedom of speech and opinion as of citizens in ASEAN member states?
Thank you for that question. As I have said, there are many provisions of the charter that could that are not covered by my talk this afternoon. The principles of democracy, freedom are all mentioned in the articles on the principles of ASEAN. Those principles, like freedom of speech and opinion, and the fundamental freedoms, as it's mentioned in the ASEAN Charter, the declarations, ASEAN, the article on principles, they have to be properly defined. Every member state has its own interpretation of these important principles. We should respect each other on how we define them. Others may base their definition on documents outside our region. Others may have their own indigenous interpretation of these principles. So I think that it will be a process for ASEAN to develop its own interpretation. These principles are enunciated in our ASEAN Charter. And I believe that through the process that we have in ASEAN, we will be able to find a common understanding on how these principles of freedom and democracy will be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. As you very rightly mentioned, that each country has their own interpretation of freedom of speech. This is a challenge for ASEAN member states to accommodate this and at the same time uphold the basic rights of citizens, especially in the context of today, where we are living in an ever growing community. We're also becoming closely tied with developing means of communication, technology, and the internet. This is certainly a very interesting issue, which will continue to be discussed throughout our discussions. Thank you very much for this point. We have another question from Jez Zalfador. Good afternoon, Ambassador. I agree that the ASEAN must craft its terms of reference to establish internal procedures. Were there earnest efforts on the part of ASEAN to finalize this?
When we were reviewing the implementation of the ASEAN Charter 2 years ago, we were able to find out that almost, maybe in my own opinion, almost 80% of provisions of the Charter have been implemented through terms of reference or rules of procedure. But still, there are some gaps, as I've said, that need to be implemented, which I mentioned earlier. We are earnestly doing them. We are doing them through the Committee on Permanent Representatives. We did that, we started it 2 years ago. And we hope that we will be able to finish it this year under the new chairmanship of Cambodia. So I assure you that we are pushing for these rules of procedures that would address the gaps or the ambiguities in certain provisions of the Charter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let's hope to see a finalized or perhaps closer to final rules of procedure to help ASEAN member states in navigating many issues. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe we're waiting, Madam, for someone who would do a code of all these rules. They are all scattered. You look at the ASEAN website, they have been there since when we started our ASEAN Charter. They started one by one. But you're right. Maybe someone could do a codification. I know there's another university in our region which has a compilation of this in their website. But it's just a compilation. But it would be nice if there's a codification and we will have a rule book.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree, Ambassador. It's certainly, this is not to mention the fact that this is a very core and basic document, so it must be treated carefully. And in so saying, this is certainly not an easy task. It's a challenge for sure, but towards a good step, towards a more positive step. So this is something we all are looking forward to. So we have here another question from W. Nankervis. Hello, Ambassador Noel. Happy New Year. Thank you very much for the very interesting lecture. I believe you said the Charter is a living document. does ASEAN envisage it being revised from time to time? From Will Nanparis.
That question is from the Ambassador of Australia to ASEAN, our good friend, Ambassador Will. Ambassador Will, yes, it's a living document. And as I have said, it does not depend much on the revision, the formal revision of the charter, but it could be clarified through Article 49. Yeah, that's what I've always been saying. There's Article 49 in the charter, which authorizes the ASEAN Coordinating Council to adopt terms of reference and rules of procedure. I'm sure you know of some of the gaps or ambiguities, yeah, especially with recent developments in ASEAN. But I believe that this could be resolved just by adopting certain rules. There's no need to have a formal process of amendment, which would entail a long procedure with each member state. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, thank you very much for joining our discussion today. The living document, the ASEAN Charter as a living document, if I may add also, has also been something that is very close to the hearts of the academic community who study ASEAN rigorously. It's perhaps one of the most basic documents that help define how we relate to one another, but at the same time, perhaps provide forecasts to where ASEAN will be many years down the line. So there is great hope that in the next few years, especially with the revisions and perhaps more additions to the charter, we hope to see a charter that is all encompassing and especially leaves no one behind. So thank you very much for the question and for the answer. I believe we have a few more questions. If the committee would be so kind as to perhaps highlight this on the screen.
Can I have a question?
Yes, certainly, Ambassador.
I'm just wondering, you have an ASEAN Study Center. So what is your foremost project now in order to promote the understanding of the ASEAN as a rules-based community?
So that's a very interesting question, Ambassador. As a study center, which is hosted within the faculty, one of our closest counterparts, and also at the same time audience. We work closely with university students. They are also people who advise us on issues that are mostly interesting to them. And so with this relation, we see the youth as part of the strategy to bring ASEAN closer as an issue and as an effort to create a sense of communal identity. And so I think most of our work, starting from a few years ago, have been directed towards the youth, because not only are they the generation to come that will perhaps be in governing seats, perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years, they are also people who are able to see this from a fresh outlook, and also a unique point of view. And so these are some very important counterparts to some of our work on top of our research work, which we conduct on a regular basis.
Yeah. So I really hope that the ASEAN Study Center, just like others in around the region, would be helpful to us in promoting further the understanding of our work here in the region.
Yes, Ambassador. Hello, is my voice audible?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Unfortunately, this is all the time that we have for our discussion today. We are very grateful, Ambassador Noel Servigon, the eye-opening discussion. Many critical questions were raised throughout the discussion. And if our viewers at home are citizens of an ASEAN member state, I'm sure this lecture has been thought-provoking for you too. On behalf of the ASEAN Study Center, I would like to sincerely thank you all for your time and for your being here today. We hope to be able to have more discussions alike in the near future. Once again, I thank Ambassador Noel Servigon and viewers for your participation. I return the floor to Madam MC. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yolida, for moderating the session. And also thank you very much again for the insightful discussion with our speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Noel Servigon. I am really sure that there are a lot of key takeaways that we can learn and reflect on from today's discussion. So for all the participants, thank you for joining. Please stay tuned to our social media to get to know more about ASEAN and participate in our future events. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at ASEAN Study Center and our Instagram at ASCUGM and our official website at asc.visipol.ugm@ac.id. To receive your certificate, don't forget to fill out the evaluation form through the link shared on the chat box. And it was shared through the screen, as you can see. And we hope you to always stay safe and healthy. And I'm Ayu. See you on our upcoming events. Thank you and have a great day. Bye.